You're listening to Giles Brown on TRE Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain. The Ransomware Hunting Team is a fascinating story about a band of misfits' impossible crusade to save the world. It's a real-life technological thriller about this ragtag band. It is by Renee Dudley and Daniel Golden. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from somewhere in the States. Both Renee and Daniel. Good afternoon from us. Good morning to you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Good. So tell us a little bit about then the background to this. Is this the murky world of cyber dealings? What exactly are we looking at here?
So this is the story of this group that fights what's become the most preeminent cyber scourge of our time, which is ransomware. And just to familiarize your listeners with ransomware, this is a type of malicious software that gets into your computers, locks your files, renders them inaccessible, and you can't open them unless you pay a ransom to hackers. And it started out about a decade ago with just a few hundred or $1,000, but now ransoms are regularly in the tens of millions of dollars and hitting the biggest institutions, hospitals, colleges, corporations, defense contractors, governments, you name it. And the Ransomware Hunting Team is this group of individual private researchers scattered around the globe. In fact, one of the original members is from Spain, and they look for vulnerabilities in the ransomware that allow them to create these free tools that victims can then use to unlock their files without having to pay hackers. And since they've been active in 2016, starting in 2016, they've saved millions of victims from paying billions of dollars to criminals.
Daniel, I suppose the thing is, it's the people that they're hacking. I mean, we're thinking who are attacking people with ransomware or making these demands. It's not just big business. It is it's the services that we rely on, especially things like hospitals and schools, who are probably just trying to get up to date with technology and weren't thinking that they were going to come under this sort of attack. Daniel.
That's right. They don't just attack big business. They attack a lot of nonprofit organizations that don't have great cybersecurity. And often the consequences are very painful and human and real. For example, a hospital in the U.S. was hit not that long ago. And as a result, its electronic and diagnostic equipment was all frozen, and a death resulted from it. There was a woman who was giving birth. They didn't notice that the fetus was in severe distress because of the ransomware attack, and the baby died from brain damage. So the consequences can be very great. And other examples, entire cities like Baltimore, Maryland, the mayor there refused to pay the ransom demand, and it took months for them to recover. People couldn't buy their homes because the city could buy or sell homes because the city couldn't provide documentation. They couldn't pay water bills or electricity. The city government basically ground to a standstill for months.
And I suppose one of the things with this, Renee, is we tend to think of cyberspace and hackers and people who fight against them as these sort of Neuromancer type renegades out there, and it's almost like the victimless crime. But this is big criminality, isn't it? It's not just random people having a pop, these ransomware attacks.
No, not at all. The evidence is mounting that they're connected to enemy governments, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. There's a hacker named Maxim Makubits who's under indictment in the U.S., who is still free in Moscow, who ran a sprawling ransomware empire called Evil Corp. And the U.S. government had evidence that he was working on behalf of the FSB, and his father-in-law is a known friend of Putin, and he has ultimate protection there, driving around Moscow in a Lamborghini with a license plate that translated to thief. ransomware is being used increasingly as a way to capture not only encrypt files, but the hackers are using them to using this crime to steal files before they actually encrypt them. And there's the thought is that they're using these stolen records to build the intelligence of the governments that they're perhaps working for.
So it's got much more consequence than just some people out to get some cash off people. Daniel, how does it actually operate then? Presumably, suddenly your system shuts down, and then does the whole network get an email saying we have attacked you, and you must send? And how do they actually? Because they can't physically come and pick up the cash, can they? So how does it work in terms of people paying ransoms? It should they so choose, and can't governments track where it's going, or does it just disappear into the internet ether as it was?
Well, ransomware comes in. It's sort of an advanced form of cryptography. You know, the kind of coding used by spy agencies, and it comes in. It freezes the computer files so you can't access them, and a ransom note typically pops up on the computer screen saying, your computer has been frozen by our ransomware. We've been watching you. Now you can't do anything unless you pay us, X amount of money to recover the key. And then the money is typically paid or charged in cyber currencies like Bitcoin, which are much harder to trace than a traditional, credit card payment or something like that. So, that way, the government makes efforts, but it's very hard to track a cyber currency payment to a particular individual. And that's pretty much how they get away with it. There's a whole industry that has sprung up to kind of abet these transactions. So if you get hit and you don't know how to use cyber currency, you can hire a negotiating firm that will deal with the ransomware hackers and try and get the price down and also arrange for the payment. But some of those companies are unscrupulous too. Some of them will say to the victim, don't worry, we can crack the code. We'll get you the key, just pay us a fee. But they don't really know how to do that. Instead, they simply pay the ransom without paying the victim. So some ransoms are paid and criminals are enriched without the victims even knowing it.
So tell us a little bit about this, as it says, this eccentric misfit band, because you would think, is it a case that the technology was more advanced when it began than the law enforcement or the people responding to it? So it was these mavericks. Renee?
So around 2015, 2016, people started going to an internet help site called Bleeping Computer, which is run by a New Yorker named Lawrence Abrams, who's a member of the ultimately became a member of the team. And victims were asking for help with this crime that, was just really gaining traction, ransomware. And there was a bunch of private researchers were jumping on the forums on this website, trying to help victims. And eventually a core group emerged that seemed more dedicated than everybody else trying to pitch in. And every time a new strain of ransomware, a new type of ransomware emerged, this group got together and looked for the vulnerabilities that would allow victims to recover their files for free. And they would develop these tools and then give them to the victims. And a couple of the people in this core group, like I mentioned, there was one in Spain named Mark Rivera Lopez, and the other man, Lawrence Abrams, who was the founder of that website. They called everybody together in that core group and said, we should start a team that's just dedicated to cracking ransomware. And they dubbed themselves the Ransomware Hunting Team. And they're spread across the world. There's a number of them in Europe and the UK and Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, Hungary, and they are just wholly devoted to cracking ransomware and getting victims the keys so that they don't have to pay hackers. And as Dan and I were researching the book, we were fascinated to see that there was there's a lot of interesting similarities among the members of the group. They'd never met each other in person. Their lives and their work was all online. But interestingly, a number of them came from similar backgrounds of either poverty or abuse. Some of them, a number of them never went to college, and some never even finished high school. And they felt a lot of them felt that fighting ransomware was a way of standing up to the bullies, the in real life bullies of their youth. The internet is very much their intellectual home, and fighting ransomware was and is their way of keeping their home safe.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
For free.
Sorry, Dave. And they do it for free.
Yes.
So, I mean,
the hunting team doesn't charge at all for its services. When you join it, you have to make an agreement that you will not charge victims. They don't want victims to have to pay twice. So they're really, even though some of them have hardly any money, they're not wealthy by any means. They're some of them are chronically very poor. They refuse to accept a penny for their services.
So this is a sort of almost like I don't know. I was going to say Robin Hood, but he robs from the rich to give to the poor. But it is entirely altruistic. I suppose it lives up to that whole thing that we, if you watch, we like maverick scientists, we like people with intelligence who step out from the mainstream, and this is the thing that we absolutely love about the internet, isn't it? These men and women working in presumably in their own homes because they don't have multi-million-pound offices, and taking on established criminals. I mean, it is quite a task to keep ahead of the technology, and presumably they could make huge amounts of money if they went to the dark side, or if they work for a government organization or a corporate organization in security.
Absolutely, they could. In fact, there's a lot of banter and taunting that goes on between the hackers and the hunting team. They communicate online and on forums all the time. And often the hackers will say to them, come on over to our side. You can make millions of dollars the easy way. You're a fool for slaving away for nothing trying to beat us. And the hunting team will respond, well, at least we don't have to worry about, the law enforcement coming and not beating our door down one day and arresting us. And we can sleep well knowing that we're doing the right thing. So, they know they're losing a lot of money, but they're very proud of what they do. And sometimes they manage to persuade a hacker to come over to the good side and start providing information and being helpful. And so, but it is interesting, this dialogue that goes on both ways between these people who they're all interested in computers and video games and things like that. They're all young, but they just have radically different motivations.
So what was the nucleus? What was the spark, Renee, for the book? What was the event that started you on doing this research with Daniel?
So it was before the book came, there was a series. Dan and I are both employed by ProPublica, the big investigative news outlet in the U.S. And I wrote and Dan edited a series about ransomware there. And one of the stories in that series was a profile of a man named Michael Gillespie, who ultimately became the star of the book. And Michael, I got to know Michael very early on in the reporting because everybody in the world told me that he was the preeminent ransomware researcher in the whole world. And he was known only by his online handle, DemonSlay335. And I tracked him down to his IT repair shop in the town of Normal, Illinois. And he's working at this place, Nerds on Call. And we just got talking as the months went on, and he was so helpful and patient in explaining very technical concepts for somebody like me who's not very technical. And eventually I went to go meet him in person at his home in rural Illinois. And that's when we knew he was really something special. I'd already known by this point that he was a member of this global team, but I didn't know just how extraordinary his personal circumstances were. He greeted me from his front porch swing on this in this working class neighborhood, rundown home. He's got a menagerie of cats and dogs and rabbits that he's taken in off the streets, and he shared his struggles of having a hard time making ends meet. Can't pay his water bill, can't pay his switches off water one month so he can pay his electric, and then switches it around the next month. He had to surrender his car to the bank. He almost lost his home, and he'd just overcome cancer. And all the while, he's saving these victims that he'll never know and who will never know him for free. And I was really impressed by his dedication to helping victims, even while confronting this onslaught of personal crises. And just while we were sitting there, he would open his phone now and then, and every time he opened it, there would be a couple dozen new desperate messages from victims who really wanted his help. And as soon as I left, I called up Dan and I said, I think this man should be a profile for us because he's for ProPublica, because he's really extraordinary. And of course, he and the rest of the team became the heroes of the book.
Dan, how willing were they to sort of be in the limelight? Because they're dealing against government agencies who don't play fair and criminal gangs who absolutely don't play fair. Do they not fear that perhaps something in the real world could happen to them?
They do fear that, and in some cases they use aliases. In other cases, one of the members of the team who grew up in Germany began getting threats and was very fearful that Russian organized crime was after him, and he relocated to the UK and rarely leaves his apartment there for fear of just those kinds of repercussions. The threats start coming online. Some of the messages can be quite disturbing. So yeah, they do have a lot of fear and a lot of concern about risking their lives or their livelihoods. But they felt it was very important to get the message out and talk about their work because, as you noted, they're really kind of the main bulwark for, Europe and the U.S. and South America against the ransomware attacks. The governments have not been very effective over the years, and so we rely on this ragtag group of volunteers that's virtually unknown. And I think they appreciated the chance a little bit to talk about their work because they've been, they're unpaid, unheralded, unknown, and we, highlighted their contribution to society.
And that thing they always say, Renee, about, not all heroes wear capes. There is something impossibly dramatic and romantic about seeing a bunch of, guys and girls in rooms, as you said, in circumstances, in a town called Normal. You couldn't make that one if you're a Hollywood scriptwriter. And yet here they are taking on and winning and really doing that sort of, it's almost a geek Avengers, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, when the series in ProPublica ran, the art that ran along with it was sort of an animation of cartoon superheroes that are styled as nerds. And I think one of the things that's really resonated with readers so far is that a number of them are neurodiverse, on the autism spectrum, and just wired different than many people. And it's this idea that they are uniquely suited to do this kind of work. A number of them have what's known as hyper focus. They have this just built-in wiring to be able to focus for hours and hours at a time without breaking that focus. Fabian Wosar talks about working for 24 hours straight once he's into something. And a number of them are like that. And the idea that they are ordinary people with ordinary jobs who are doing this extraordinary work, has really resonated and is sort of hopeful in such dark days that we're in.
Daniel, what do you hope that people learn from the book and obviously catching the documentary? What do you hope that people learn from the ransomware hunting team?
Well, I hope that they learn more about ransomware and what a threat it really is, because it hasn't gotten the attention it deserves as a very scary crime, and one that crosses national boundaries so that it's not easy to handle. In the old days before cybercrime, a crime would be committed. If the police could get the scene quick enough, they could arrest the person. But here we're dealing with an international crime where the criminals can't be extradited. So I hope it raises people's awareness. And I hope also that if they are hit by ransomware, or if an organization is, that they will then, go to the authorities or go to the hunting team and make it public, rather than seeing it as kind of a stigma, a sign of shame. I got hit because I have bad cybersecurity, so I'm not going to tell anybody. I'll just quietly pay the ransom. We need to know about these attacks. We need people to be aware of the threat, and hopefully that kind of transparency and vigilance will be effective.
And Renee, you spent obviously time with various members of the team. What's your favorite memory or your sort of wow moment whilst you were researching it?
And a number of things, but one, of course, the dedication and the drive and the dedication to public service of the members of the team is the first and foremost. But one of the other things that is so striking is just how crucial they are, because they're filling a void left by virtually the rest of society. You look at law enforcement, which has dropped the ball on ransomware for essentially a decade, initially dismissing it. The U.S. law enforcement initially dismissed it as an ankle biter crime, and continued to do so, even as it evolved into something more and more serious. You have the cybersecurity industry, which stands to profit in some ways from the rise of ransomware, because people will buy more products, and there's no money in creating free tools for ransomware victims. And then there's the insurance industry, which continued to readily pay ransoms, even as ransoms were growing and growing, and they were feeding into this economy that and had a direct link to the rise of ransomware by paying the ransoms and making it a lucrative crime for criminals to get into. And against the backdrop of all of these sort of profit-seeking entities, we have the ransomware hunting team, which is not seeking fame, glory, or money, and it's almost as if they were, there's no. It almost seemed like there was no other way, because they're not motivated by the typical things that motivate people.
The book is called The Ransomware Hunting Team. It's by Renee Dudley and Daniel Golden, who've been speaking to today. Daniel, if people want to find you online, and Renee, if people want to find you online, where can they locate you?
Well, they can find Renee and me on Twitter or LinkedIn, places like that. And in terms of the book, it's available wherever online books are purchased, at all the major sites. And we'd also love for it to be translated into, languages and other languages, and available in Europe. And if people have ideas on that, please let us know. Or if any publishers are listening, we think it has great worldwide appeal, because so many of the heroes are from outside the United States and from European countries. So we hope you'll take a look through any variety of media and enjoy what we've written.
And Renee, where can people find you online? Is it Twitter and LinkedIn as well?
Twitter and LinkedIn, or ReneeDudley.com.
Wonderful. The book is called The Ransomware Hunting Team. It will also be available as a virtual download from our own virtual bookstore. Renee and Daniel, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
It's been a pleasure.